identity theft, which in reality is the worst kind of identity theft. Because if the evil one can steal what you and I were really meant to be in Christ, then he severely disables how we can best serve him in our culture today. And we hear a lot about identity theft. It's very prevalent. But spiritual identity theft is even more rampant than identity theft. And it can happen so subtly and sometimes very predictably. My brother Dan is a pastor in the Chicago area, and he recently wrote a book called That's a Very Good Question. And it's basically a book filled with questions that he's received through years of ministry and then biblical answers to them. And in one response, he gives this illustration. He writes this, he says, on one occasion I was observing two little children play. One of the kids was a little bit older and bigger than the other one. They proceeded to put on a brief clinic for me. They were both sitting in the midst of many toys. Each of them had access to lots and lots of toys. But the bigger child noticed that the smaller child was playing with a particular toy and really enjoying it. And for some reason, that bothered the bigger child. And the little child just seemed to be having too much fun with that toy. So the bigger child approached the littler child and took his toy away. And that upset the smaller child for a moment, but there were lots of toys. It wasn't long at all before the smaller child picked up another toy and started playing with it. Amazingly, in just a little time, the bigger child once again saw the younger child having a wonderful time with a different toy. And of course, it was a toy that was equally available to the bigger child just moments earlier when neither of them were playing with it. And the bigger child had already taken the toy previously that he wanted from the smaller child, so he should have been satisfied. But no. He quickly tossed aside the toy that he had just plundered from the smaller child, and he pulled the other toy out of the smaller child's hands. Dan continued, I thought this little fellow might start crying, but he didn't. Well, now catch this. The smaller child went back to retrieve the first toy that he was playing with, that the bigger child just threw away. And you guessed it, the bigger child saw him playing with the original toy, and he saw the little child was really enjoying the toy, and of course that made him want it again. And Dan writes, I'm so glad that at that juncture, the mom of these two little children was able to referee the situation. And it's a good thing, because the little child had a look in his eye that he didn't have before. He was smaller, but his look was a dangerous look. It looked in a small way like Stallone and Rambo. It was a look that seemed to say, I'm not going to take this anymore. Isn't it amazing how we can see the sin nature even in small children? We can see the potential that the evil one sees for spiritual identity theft in our life. Well, that's the part of the dilemma that we're all of us are born into, aren't we? That sin dilemma just helps to show that there is nothing simple about us. We're all very complex. We're very multifaceted. Sometimes we're not very easy to understand, are we? Truth is, there are many factors that have gone into creating our true spiritual identity. King David of the Old Testament of the Bible writes this in Psalm 139:14. He says, I praise you, God, because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. The Living Bible translation of this goes like this. Look at this. Thank you, God, for making me so wonderfully complex. It's amazing to think about. Your workmanship is marvelous, and how well I know it. I mean, that verse right there is extremely difficult to deny, isn't it? That all of us are wonderfully complex. There's so much that goes into all of our makeup. So to become all that God intends for us, it would be very helpful to look at the many factors that could affect our spiritual identity. In the Old Testament, there's a verse, Ecclesiastes 7:18. It goes like this: a person who fears God deals responsibly with all of reality, not just a piece of it. We're complex. We need to deal with all of the reality that's a part of us. And if we're going to be serious about having our spiritual identity stolen, or not, hopefully not stolen from us, we need to look at all the factors in our life, not just pieces of them, that can influence our true spiritual identity. Can you relate? Again, that's the name of this message series, and that's a question that we've thrown out there several times. I'm going to throw it out there again several times today. Because it's important that we relate to this, because our identity is crucial. It's what makes us, us. It's what makes us who we are. Jesus once gave a parable about talents, and we've given this parable several times in the past here at New Hope, and the parable teaches that a master gives one servant 10 talents, another servant 5 talents, and yet another servant just 1. The master then instructs them, now go and make the most of your talents, no matter how many you have. Make the most of them. And one of the main points of that parable is that we're going to be responsible for the talents that God gives us, for the gifts, for the possessions, for the passions, for the resources he gives us. We're not going to be accountable for opportunities we didn't have. That just wouldn't be just. And God is a just God. That wouldn't be just. But we will be held accountable for everything that we've been given. We're complex. And we'll be responsible for that which we have been given. Another nuance of that parable is that each of us don't have the same talents, resources, passions, and gifts. We're complex. We're unique. Neither do we have the same background or the same heritage or the same problems or the same baggage. We don't all have the same potentials. But even with all of that, even all of our uniqueness, we're all loved by God incredibly, and in our uniqueness. And it's our uniqueness that also leads to our true spiritual identity. Now, sometimes to our chagrin, we can't choose our gifts, and we can't choose our talents. The 3 servants didn't choose how many talents they were receiving, but they were responsible for whatever talents they were given. And each were responsible for something. And they were going to be held accountable, and if you read the parable further, they were held accountable for the talents that they were given. And similarly, you and I didn't have an opportunity to choose things in our life that has helped make us us. Now, some of the stuff we've had an opportunity to choose, but some of the stuff we didn't have an opportunity to choose. If you've ever played a card game, you know that the rules in many card games are to play the cards that you're dealt. A lot of card games are that way. You got to play what you're dealt. You're not allowed to mix and match from other people's hands. You can't say, hey, I think I'd rather play her hand, or I'd rather play his hand than this hand that I've got. We're to play the cards that were dealt to us. The 3 servants in that parable were asked to play the talents that were given to them. 1 had 10, 1 had 5, 1 had 1. And they were to play what they were dealt. So for the sake of the message today, think of it this way. There are some things that you and I have been dealt in this life that we did not choose, right? We didn't choose our parents. We didn't choose when we were born. We didn't choose how we were to be born. We didn't choose our race. We didn't choose our talents and our gifts. Those were given to us. There are all these things that make us uniquely us that we had absolutely no choice over. And God knows, we're playing the hand that we were dealt. Well, one of the factors that makes us unique in life, makes us uniquely us, one of the factors that we didn't choose is our chemistry, our physical makeup, our DNA, our chromosomes, our hormones, our chemical makeup. Some of us were born with a higher sensitivity to pain than others. For some of us, every little pain is realized very easily. And that's not wrong or right. It's just the way that we're wired. Others were born with a high tolerance, very high tolerance for pain. I think my wife Candy has that makeup. to be married to me for 32 years. Some of us were born with a high energy level. Some of us were born with lower energy. That's not right or wrong either way. It's just the way we were born. Bottom line, every one of us has a structural chemical makeup to our body. It's the way we're wired. Some of us have great eyesight. Others need glasses, contacts, or laser surgery to see better. Some of us hear really well. Others don't hear very well. Some of us use that as an excuse. Some people click on all cylinders. Others may be low on some kind of hormone that affects us emotionally or mentally or physically. And again, none of the stuff that I've mentioned here is right or wrong, sinful or shameful. It's just how we've been made up. I usually I try to work out at our local Y 2 or 3 times a week. And if I'm there in the mornings, I will often see a crew of mentally challenged, mostly young adults come in and work out with supervision from the organization that we're with. And they'll come in and they'll play basketball and they'll stretch. They'll get on the cardio machines. They'll do weight machines. And for the most part, these guys and gals, these mentally challenged guys and gals, are anxious to work out. They're mild-mannered and they're cheerful. And I don't think I would describe myself as cheerful when I'm working out. I'm just not. But there's one young lady in particular that almost always has this tremendous attitude, always smiling. She uses the elliptical, she uses the treadmill, she'll hop on the roller, and while she's doing this, she'll be singing, she'll just break out in laughter while she's doing it. And that's not me. I'm not singing and joyous while I'm on a treadmill, but she is. Now last week, this mentally challenged young lady came in with this awesome demeanor that she always has, with a t-shirt that read this way. It was on the back of her shirt. It said, "I'm rocking my extra chromosome." I'm rocking my extra chromosome. And she's been taught that her uniqueness is worthy of positive expression. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps just remembering that t-shirt. I'm rocking my extra chromosome. What an awesome example she is. No identity theft with her. And I just had to smile. She has been dealt a hand not of her choosing, and yet she is moving positively ahead in her life with what she's been dealt. And the amazing thing is, you guys, God can use our physical and our mental and our emotional challenges for his purpose and for ours. And even more amazingly, it's often out of the most difficult challenges that God has brought the most glory. Out of our weaknesses and out of our challenges, that's when God has brought the most glory, many times. So Psalm 139:14 is true. Thank you for making me so wonderfully complex. It is amazing to think about. Your workmanship is marvelous, and how well I know it. I mean, just read the Bible, guys, and see how God showed up in people's lives who had tremendous weaknesses and tremendous challenges. Another factor that we're dealt in life, out of our choosing, in a lot of respects, especially early on, are our connections. A big part of who you are and who I am is due to the relational connections that we had no choice over. And those connections may have been healthy, they may have been unhealthy, they may have been abusive, they may have been non-existent. And this is an important link because studies show that our identity, how we see ourselves, is largely determined by what we think, what we believe the most important people in our life thought about us or think about us. Can you relate? I can relate. It's our connections that help give meaning and purpose and identity. So if we grew up feeling disconnected from pivotal people in our life, we may have a difficult time discerning our true identity, our true spiritual identity. People who encountered healthy relationships in their life while growing up, most know that their life matters and that they're loved and that they're accepted. You know, so much of life is relational and relationally pivotal.